Hello and welcome to Wild Perfect. It's the April edition, bringing you news of conservation projects in and around our village of Perfect. So this month we're reviewing some of the highlights of this and last year. You remember we went digging with Richard as he began that Herculean task of clearing ditches in the rewilding project at the old house. It's all part of Joy Sashak's plan to return an old golf course to its original and natural form. We return there to see what light work Richard, the groundsman, has made of the 9 miles of rivers. But we begin with a visit to St Nicholas Church, where in January we met Jimmy Walker, who looks after the churchyard and puts conservation at the top of her agenda.
In the 12th century, when the church was built, this, from all appearances, was a small rural hamlet. And they weren't in the habit of putting up memorial stones in those days, so it would just be the sacred land around the church. By taking a conservation approach to looking after a churchyard, you are giving the wildlife a place of sanctuary, particularly if there are a lot of houses about where there are people looking after their gardens in a very manicured way. And quite often there are rare things found in churchyards because they've never been used for agriculture if they're old. So they've not had fertilizers, they've not had pesticides, and they've not had herbicides. So it's good to have a space around a church which is as natural as possible for people to enjoy. I'd helped with a little bit of volunteering when we first came here in 1960, but my chief concern was that nothing should be spoilt that was growing here naturally, and that the birds and the bats that lived here should still have their habitats. We get a lot of deer in this churchyard. We have woodpeckers. The only trouble is that the green woodpeckers cost us a whole new spire when we, not very long, had it all reshingled, and we had to have it reshingled with a much more expensive type of shingle because they look for the insects. But you get insects here. We've had flocks of mistle thrushes coming for the yew tree berries, though sadly I haven't seen those for a few years. So there are quite a lot of creatures which frequent the churchyards. With climate change, it's difficult because certain things grow happily, which are thriving species like the brambles, and we can't let them run riot, although they provide food for us and food for birds and other creatures. This is part of the hedge that we planted into the entrance to the new graveyard. We deliberately planted a conservation grade hedge which contains a large number of species which are useful to the wildlife. The first thing I did was write a description of how we looked after the churchyard, which was put up in the church porch so that people could see why not all the grass was beautifully cut, and things were left for the winter sometimes to produce shelter for the birds or the animals. We haven't really had the opportunity to put new habitats in because one of the big problems with the climate change is the fact that things like brambles and nettles tend to grow all year if you're not careful. And if you let them grow all year, then pretty soon they take over the entire churchyard. So we have to control those by cutting or digging out. We don't use chemical weed killers or pesticides here at all. Conservation can be a difficult word because it depends what you're conserving. And naturally, there is a succession, starting off with simple algae, mosses, liverworts, which break down and make a soil that other things can grow in, and you end up with forest, which is how Britain used to be in the past. So you have to decide what sort of countryside you are conserving. Otherwise, this would be buried in a forest, like the old temples in Southeast Asia and things like that.
I met Jimmy Walker, who heads the team of gardeners at St Nicholas Church, and also, incidentally, at Wisley Church and that of the Church of the Good Shepherd. And you're watching Wild Perfect, a series of videos on conservation projects in and around our village. We continue with our review of the last couple of months by revisiting Joy and Akil Sashak's rewilding project. You remember that back in October we saw the Victorian ditches and watercourses clogged with reeds and sludge, the result of years of neglect. Well, all that's about to change, as a major project is on hand to open up these meandering waterways to allow the water to flow freely through them once more. The Herculean task of clearing the miles of clogged up ditches with their decades of reeds and silt and restoring a proper water flow through the estate falls to Richard, the groundsman. It's a project that couldn't be entertained without the help of serious digging machinery. During a break from the work, he told us just how far they'd progressed.
So a third of the way through the project, we were up over probably the second green over, ditching as usual, put the bucket in, pulled it out, there must have been 30-40 eels within the rubbish. Put it on the bank, and of course the eels just couldn't wait to get back into the water. But so there is life in here. The only problem is, through not ditching all these years, you've lost the oxygen in the water and the movement of water, so it's actually just stagnated. There's no fish in here. We found a pike many years ago up in Joy's land, the original land, but pike could just get through anything anyway. But I'm hoping with this movement of water, you've got a lot more ducks on there now and wildlife. I'm hoping that, if we can introduce some bottom feeding fish, crucian carp, something like that, they in turn will then
roach and
they'll just eat the stuff that I'm pulling out now, basically.
Yeah.
Well, that's the sort of aim of the game of it all.
Once you get a flow, it'll clean itself as well, won't it?
It is. You know? I think this is the first run through. That'll be great. I think a secondary run through will really start doing the business. It's a mishmash of loads of different styles of soil displaced through ancient rivers, I would have said. Don't forget down the road, the sandpit. You know, all round here.
Very irony.
Chertsey is gravel extraction. Round here in the Surrey Hills is sand extraction. I mean, this is just to drop the water level at the moment. We're not being pretty about it. It's not a landscaping task. It's just basically you can see the water's now flowed, that you've now got the sticks moving that way up until this next blockage, and when we move that again, it'll go. The first 3 years will be crucial really to the whole project. So we're not only dealing with the land water from Bolton's Lane all the way down permeating through the land, but we're dealing with modern civilization, isn't it? It's really at the end of the day, and that's it. All of that pile of next year I can put into here, and it'll block that, and the water will then pass past it rather than welling around it.
Soaking all the trees.
So
it'll probably grow better as well.
It's a long-term project at the end of the day. It's not something that can just be done once and we're done. I think it's, don't forget, before machinery, guys were hand ditching this every winter. That was their winter job. Once they'd done the cattle and everything else, there's not a lot to do in the winter. Get on the ditches, because if the ditches aren't done, your crops fail because their boots are in water all the time. So it's just the old school way, isn't it?
I was talking to Richard the groundsman at Joy Sashak's rewilding project, all 100 acres of them. Well, that's it for this month. Hopefully next time we'll be able to get out and about and bring you news of conservation projects that are starting up once more now that, well, we're all able to move about a bit more freely. You can email us at wildperfect@gmail.com or visit our website www.wildperfect.com. Well, thanks very much for watching. We'll be back in May, so I hope you can join us then. From all of us here, goodbye from Wild Perfect.